Hey guys, welcome back to Contest Prep University. I'm Joe Klemczewski with Adam Atkinson. We're going to do a little review on the 2024 Olympia results. For those of you who may watch this in the future, it just occurred this past weekend. Adam, who lives in Vegas, was there. And as always, we like to cover trends in division criteria, how things are evolving in the sport. And this, to me, Adam, I could be wrong. I would always defer to your expertise on the ground. It did seem a little bit transitional in some of the things that we saw in the rankings, the final results. So the first division, men's classic, and of course Chris Bumstead continues his reign. And a lot of people said he obviously just looked his best. He really improved some areas, brought an incredibly lean and complete package. So what were your thoughts on this particular division?
Yeah, this was to me probably one of the funnest divisions to watch. There was a lot going on stage and a lot happening between the prejudging and finals. So when you look at the top call out in the prejudging, you obviously had Chris, Mike Summerfield, Ramon Brion, and Jose. And then you had Michael DeBall, who, was definitely expected to do well, and Wesley Vissers. It was definitely a really tough call out.
Mhm.
A lot of switching happening. And, you could definitely tell who your top three were between Chris, Mike, and Urs. Personally, I thought Urs was going to be second based off the prejudging round. And there were just a couple things that happened with him that from the prejudging and finals. And I think I wanted to touch on that also too, with the utmost respect for all of these athletes. You know, it's hard to talk negatively, but this is what we do. It's bodybuilding. You get critique, and Urs is actually one of my favorite athletes. I think that's why my eye was so much on him. But it really seemed like between prejudging and finals, he just wasn't as full, which led to just a little bit less tightness for him, especially in the legs, was where I noticed that. And then the announcers had even mentioned, the tanning issue. He was a little light coming into the finals. Um, Ramon actually had his tan running off in prejudging. You actually saw some good sportsmanship between him and Breon. Breon started, looking at him like, wipe yourself down. But he cleaned that up by the finals. But it just shows you how important peaking is. One thing you have to realize that's a little different with the men's classic physique versus the bodybuilding. They have to weigh in and they have to make weight per their height. And they're that can always make peaking stability a little bit tougher. These guys are honestly at their weight cap at their height, pushing the limits, probably dropping some water to hit that weigh in, and then to completely change the chemistry of your body after a weigh in can be really difficult. But the nice thing about the Olympia, you have a little bit more time to, you know, move into more fullness. But those were some of the things I noticed mainly in between the prejudging and finals round that I really wanted to point out, just as far as like an action standpoint goes.
hmm Yeah, and I wanted to mention peaking as well because as I look at this lineup, it's it's almost difficult to call it classic because you don't see much difference between these guys in the open men bodybuilding. Um, yeah, obviously style differences in terms of posing and trunks and all that in the division criteria, but I also look with a curious eye, maybe not even a critical eye, on how people are peaking. This is the world where you're going to see a lot of the old school methodology and a lot of people coming in super flat because they're dehydrated and they're maybe even using prescription diuretics to try to mitigate, PED, bloat, and so forth. But whether it's genetics or just really nailing the peaking process, Bumstead really does seem to be consistent. And even if he is not as full or hydrated as he could be per your or my standards, he certainly doesn't look flat. So, just the shape of his physique, some of the ways he's continued to improve is pretty impressive. And I think I heard he may be retiring after this year. But for classic physique, all of a sudden becoming a very, very dominant class, he has certainly created quite a standard.
Yeah, absolutely. Being a six-time Mr. Olympia and Classic is very impressive. I think he played it smart. That division fit him well. Could he have done open bodybuilding? I 1000% think he could. But you're doing so well in Classic. Why change it? Why push more drugs? Chris is probably one of the smartest businessmen. He's like the classic physique version of Jay Cutler,
Mhm.
and I think when you have a lot of other things and things checked off on your boxes, that's a great move. And I think that's why Chris is the people's champ. I mean, one, his physique's phenomenal. He's, a really good person. His speech was amazing on retirement. I think it teared up the whole audience. But also just respect to him as a businessman and what he's been able to achieve through bodybuilding, I think really motivates many generations to come.
And even though he has that size that I'm describing, I mean, the legs, the glutes, the back, as you are describing, not quite pushing over and crossing into the mass monster type look. When he does his front double bicep with a full vacuum in his, abdominal area and even a half bicep shot, it really is reminiscent of a Lee Labrada, even though Lee, of course, was a much, smaller person in stature. Maybe the mustache even helps, but we're going to talk about Hunter Labrada probably a little bit later. But it just really is. It pushes the limit on the division, but he still has the flair of the classic physique look that has made him obviously very dominant here. But where did you want to head next? Over to regular bodybuilding or classic physique?
Yeah, I think we go over to bodybuilding now
Okay.
because it's been a really interesting past few years for this sport.
Gotcha. Oops, I think I may have pulled up the wrong one here. What did you think of the overall winner?
Obviously was a huge upset for a lot of people. I think that a lot of people doubted Samson for a lot of reasons. One, having a female coach. I think it's debatable that that's the first female coach that has won a Mr. Olympia title. So which is his wife. So that's pretty cool. One thing that I kind of wanted to point out is, your years of, Big Rammy and some of these Phil Heath, in Phil's later years, these guys are bringing classic physique shape to the men's bodybuilding categories. And, mass monsters are always cool and awesome to work with. And I think we're seeing a change where it is hard to see the divide in the division a bit, aside from the size aspect, because these guys aren't only big now, they're aesthetic. And if you look at Andrew Jack, I mean, he's huge. His lat to waist um, you know, X Factor is absolutely incredible. Him placing fifth, he's a relatively new competitor. I see him jumping up in the rankings by next year. But all of the top five, Martin's a little bit shorter, so that's going to be harder for him to, have those tapers, but they're still really nice on him. I was really impressed with what he was able to do from Detroit Pro to this show. But these guys are coming in big and aesthetic now. And shape. This is what happened with bikini. Bikini used to just be about having the glute tie-ins. Now, it's really divided by shape. And now we're seeing this crossover into bodybuilding. And I find it so interesting that shape is back in the mix with this.
Yeah, I'm kind of chomping at the bit to get to bikini and wellness for some of the reasons you just mentioned, but that is the first thing I noticed about Samson. Genetics are always genetics, and no matter how hard you try, whether you're a Dexter Jackson, a Lee Haney, who Samson kind of reminds me of a little bit in some of his poses. You have the musculature you have the tendon to muscle length and width ratios, and all you can do is try to minimize or maximize strengths versus weaknesses to quote shape your physique in a way that you have control. Obviously, a lot of people do that by saying, well, because my obliques are a little bit thick, maybe like an original Rich Gaspari or somebody else, maybe a Jay Cutler, I'm not going to deadlift, or I'm not going to squat, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. If my vastus lateralis isn't quite as dominant, I'm going to do my squats with my heels up on a block, or, everybody's trying to do something like that. And still, I know this is not a podcast on physiology, but just the force going through your body is going to create stimulus to grow, virtually no matter what you do. So it really does come down to your genetic strengths and weaknesses and structure. When we get to the under 212, I'll mention that with Sean Clarita, somebody who's had an incredible career, but is now being kind of bumped down to second place and so forth because of just genetics. Like nobody's coming in by outworking Sean Clarita. He's just a little bit of a victim to some of his genetic flaws. So when I first looked at Samson, I thought, first of all, the condition is there. I don't see any issues with peaking, but his symmetry, as you mentioned, is just absolutely spectacular. He really has that reminiscent kind of shape of a Lee Haney with the small waist. You look at his even obliques; they almost seem to come into the front of his iliac spine. Where the rectus abdominis and the obliques can hold their attachment there. And if you just don't have that, you're not going to be quite as aesthetically symmetrically similar. So he's obviously capitalizing on some good framework there, but then you have to do the work, and he obviously did, as you said, to the tune of an upset.
Yeah. The only thing like I'd like to see Samson improve on is just, you know, keep I think he's got room to keep going. So get a little bit bigger because why not? And keep the symmetry. But I'd like to see his quads just a little bit more detailed because, that's just my personal opinion. I like that look when you see, Hottie's quads next to his. Hottie just has some of the craziest quad detail I've ever seen. So you could arguably say that, Hottie won from the waist down, but it was everything else that Samson was just really dominating. So, and then Derek just came in a little softer than usual, which is really surprising for him because he's, someone who is known for that and known for the conditioning. He has a great coach. They're both great people, but it's unfortunate when those things happen. But then you have the option. Do you stick with your coach or do you try something completely new? I think that him and his coach have had pretty good proven track record. The more time you spend together, sometimes there's more chances for things to go wrong. You're not always going to have a perfect show. I think they'll stick it out, and I think he'll come in even better next year. It's arguable though with going up against someone like Samson. Does he take a year off and then try to go for the title in 2 years versus one? Especially people, I think now forget that Derek used to be a 212 Olympian. He's the only guy who has won the 212 in the Open title. And I think that it's feasible to maybe look at time off, but then you also have to consider finances. You're making a pretty good check for third place at the Olympia. And it's a good business move to keep competing.
It's funny you say that. I was literally going to bring that up. Like wow, look at the purse this year. 600 grand for the overall winner. Uh, Gosh, I know this goes back a ways, but I remember when you're lucky to get 50 grand. I remember when the overall winner moved up to $100,000. So you could say, wow, this is almost like having a real job. I can make a living if I win the Olympia. But I do agree with Lunsford. He has won on conditioning, and he doesn't have necessarily the best structural genetics completely. Obviously, he's a phenomenal champion. But you look at the higher lats a little bit, block your waist as we were talking about with the obliques, in some poses. But overall, I was a little bit happy and surprised to see Hunter Labrada get a first call out here. I mentioned him because first of all, in my world, somebody who deeply grew up academically in anatomy, physiology, in all of that. I was curious. He's Lee Labrada's son, and Lee Labrada was epic in my generation. Somebody I looked up to. So I'm like, wow, how is this going to turn out with half of that DNA from Lee? And it is really, really cool to see the similarities in their physiques just on a much more massive platform. I mean, obviously, Hunter's taken it to the extreme for size, but anybody else kind of stand out to you in the open?
Well, Hunter definitely stands out. I think he's got great conditioning. He's one that I think has a lot of years to come. And I think he went pro in 2019 or 18 maybe. I know it was down at back when the Nationals was in Miami. But he still does have good shape, but I think as he gets bigger, his shape is going to be better. So that's kind of what I'm looking for out of him. I think we'll see him in the top five, sooner than later. And he might be another one who maybe takes a little bit of extra time off. But that's hard to drive into these people. I mean, these are people who love the sport and probably love the sport more than life itself. And, you really have to consider what people want. And at this level, the, you know, the decision making, and the genetics and everything is such a big deal. And you really find out who your champions are. Some of these people can't take an off season longer than a year. That's just detrimental to them. And that will be what divides them from, reaching that Mr. Olympia title. So, their love for the sport could be the one thing that keeps them from that title.
Yeah, and another thing that is interesting to me is what I would call a transitional year. It just seems like everybody's coming in better condition, even if they're not peaking as perfectly as they think they could have. There aren't people who are completely blowing it or having major miscues. It's really impressive, and I would say that's just a great stamp of approval to the information quality out there, as well as coaches and podcasts and so forth. So that just means the quality is going to be that much tougher. So speaking of taking time off and really trying to improve, you just can't have an off year and come in and expect to do well or defend a title.
Yeah, and I've not looked at Derek's photos from last year to this year. It may not even be he wasn't as conditioned. It may be that everyone else was so much more conditioned that it made him not look as conditioned. And that definitely happens. At this level, you really don't get to stand up to this great of a lineup until this big of a show.
Mhm. Well, in the 212s, of course, Pearson beat Clarita, and then it goes down from there. But anything stand out to you in that particular division?
I did feel like Sean came off, which was really unfortunate. I think that also Angel has been having such a great year this year. He was definitely someone to watch out for. But the thing with Keon, I think that's so impressive is who puts a waist that size on someone with like literally turkey thighs coming out of their hips? I mean, Keon is so aesthetically perfect. I mean, gosh, I mean, he would be a great classic guy too. It's just he is
Exactly.
literally so perfect. Um, you know, someone's just gonna have to have that perfect baby to beat him, I think.
I mean, it's literally, I'm looking at his front double bicep and his waist looks like it's 14 inches in diameter, and as you said, just quads all day long. And then the lats. Another person who looks really reminiscent of the Lee Haney kind of shape, and yet then he turns around and seeing the vastus lateralis from the rear, the adductors, the hams, the glutes, even with slightly high lats, little erector spinae dominant, the lats aren't quite as low in terms of attachment into the lat aponeurosa as it connects to the lower lumbar spine and pelvic girdle. Uh, all that to say that somebody who has as thick of an upper back as he has and good shoulder width and the small waist, you can get away with being erector spinae dominant. I mean, we know Brian Whitaker from the natural bodybuilding world who was like that, and was able to win big. So yeah, I mean, if you could say he has one flaw, it's there, but it's not really a flaw because you turn him around to the front double bicep, and it looks like his lats are 747 wings. So even though he carries it up a little bit high, that may be the advantage of the small waist, or makes his waist, look even smaller. So yeah, I mean, great class. This is one of the things I've always loved as a change in the Olympia is bringing in that 212 class. Makes me wonder if they would ever do kind of a traditional lightweight, middleweight, heavyweight. But even if they just stay with this, I think it's a big move forward in the overall.
I questionably wonder if classic they should do a short and tall.
Mm.
But however, when you see someone like Mike make it in, it's like, well, we don't need it. Sometimes, I'm not as I'm not as seasoned as of a judge at any level, but let alone this level. Um, outside of the top, eight, the rest of it was really hard for me to pick. Like who do you call into, the top 10 spot? It's tough because you've got all the different heights of the people. I do think a divide in the middle would be helpful. But again, the judges do this day in and day out. So I'm at least happy that my, top five were pretty on point with what I thought it might be.
Mhm. How about men's physique? Any surprises to you there with Ryan Terry coming in on top?
Yeah, I think that Ryan's definitely got an incredible physique. I think Ollie, not a lot of people expected him to fall in that second spot. And it's really hard to juggle it between the two. One of the biggest things is the chest on these guys are absolutely phenomenal. I joked with my wife. I said the chest is the glutes of the men's physique division. You really have to have a good you know shape in your chest. And I think Emmanuel too, popping in that top. I think he was fourth, fifth. I can't remember now, but
Fourth.
that was kind of a surprise. He looked incredible. Um, and I know Aaron Banks wasn't necessarily happy with his placement. I thought he looked amazing. Um, I think for him just still getting the lats a little bit wider and making his waist look a little bit smaller isn't going to hurt. When you're a taller competitor too, I think sometimes it is hard to, size up against somebody like Ryan, who's a little bit shorter and just really looks like a ball of muscle next to him. I think the thing with Ryan is too, he's just so aesthetically pretty, like the flow of the delts to the arms is just so perfect. Nothing really looks out of place. And it's not that Aaron even looked bad. It's just when you get someone that aesthetically perfect standing next to you, it's hard not to be in awe. But I had a really hard time choosing between um, honestly Ryan and Ollie, to be honest, because I think I kind of favored Ollie, to be honest. I just really like his waist taper a lot. I really like the way his abs looked. But we could also argue he maybe needs just a little bit more fullness in his upper chest. And that might be the one slight flaw he has.
It is so funny you say that because those were identical to my thoughts. Identical. This is a division that I think is just kind of holding its own right now in terms of there aren't major changes in judging trends and so forth. You go from open bodybuilding to classic, where you want a little bit more of an aesthetic, symmetrical angle. And here you just want the perfect physique, right? Like you mentioned chest. Of course, it comes down to abs, which means conditioning has to be spot on. But then you turn around and how does your symmetry look from the rear? What are the genetic uh, differences in back? And with Ali, as you mentioned, you could definitely argue Terry had just a little bit more size and just overall muscle mass, but both in the lats and the chest and the delts. But when you look at the ab structure, of second place and even down to the tan and the symmetry and I mean, all of these guys are fantastic at this level, but there was just a little more of a flair to me for all the reasons that you said. It'd be interesting to see that particular judging call out. But I thought after those two, it was, great competition, but those were the two clear winners here.
Yeah.
Um, how about let's take a look at wheelchair real quick. I do not want to skip these guys, obviously well deserving. Were you able to see any of this on stage?
I did actually. Funny enough, I was pretty locked in on everything as it was going on. So the wheelchair division is something that I will always be, you know, super, super excited about. Now I do not remember the names of the people, and that's one of the hardest things for me is to remember. But that division is just always so incredible to me because one of the reasons I think people should watch it too is when Nick, I do know Nick well, who's the MC, when you describe these people's impairments, it really lets you know what may or may not be possible for these people. Some of them are not able to train their abs at all. You'll see different chair heights based on, how upright they're able to stay. So, when we just talked about bodybuilding genetics as a whole, these people are competing around, their injuries and what they can and cannot do, and physically cannot do these things. And I think that's so amazing to be able to be in the top three in the world. And maybe not be able to train your abs or maybe not be able to hit a certain pose because you can't balance in your chair as well. It's a division that I think we need to see it grow more to declassify it by injury a little bit more. I think we could start getting into, like maybe a low back division and a no back division with the chairs. I think it's needed. So it's something I'm kind of passionate about, if you can tell. But we do need more participation to, start making those divisions because I think they only had about 8 or 9 competitors, if I remember right. It wasn't very many. And then they brought the newest female pro out who was amazing. I thought that was awesome. They let her represent the women's side of the sport, which definitely needs some growth too.
That's awesome. Yeah, 12 competitors. Harold Kelly won. And you're exactly right. The level of injury, if I have a really good friend who's a quadriplegic with a C2-3 injury. And if you're a C3-4, C4-5, C6-7, all the way down, that dramatically changes what you can do with your arms, let alone getting into the thoracic spine or the lumbar spine. Somebody with a lumbar spine injury, they could have full control of their trunk, including abdominal training, support, as you said so articulately. And so, yeah, that makes a big difference on how you're going to appear, how you could even train. So I really like that idea. Almost just like we have the under 212, maybe there is a spinal injury level that allows you to be more of a paraplegic versus a quadriplegic type class. That would be incredibly interesting and probably a little bit more fair to some of those with higher level injuries. All right, on to the women. We're gonna go a little bit long on this one, but let's start if you don't mind. Let's just go right to bikini. Um, what did you think about this? I have some thoughts, but I want to hear yours first.
It was a sweep, in my opinion, with Laura Lee. However, there was just a slight doubt in my mind with, her glutes are still relatively just a little large for, when you pick glutes that are that big, we are setting the standard. And, I thought, wow, my girl's got some work to do in the glutes, where Ashley's are definitely significantly smaller. And if you were to pick two people who look the most alike, it was Ashley and Jasmine. Jasmine needing some work on her legs. Jasmine's in a weird spot, she has a little bit, maybe too much hamstring detail coming down. However, she has to be that lean to get the glutes to pop. So she really hit that conditioning perfect. But yeah, when you're up against someone like Laura Lee with gigantic glutes, you definitely want to come in lean enough to make your glutes look, relatively enhanced and pop next to everyone else. I think that Amy, it was definitely a little bit of an upset for her to get fourth based on just, she had won virtually every show she had done. I thought she looked fantastic. I do think that she has, a slightly different bikini look than the top three, but this just really shows you when you look at the top five, because you got to throw Vanya in there too. And actually, we could even talk about Ashlyn because I think she was really close, and she's got a very different physique. Bikini, and I hear Sandy say this up and down, you have to bring your best physique. And there's a lot of there's a lot of broadness with that. And that's what makes this the hardest division. I actually like that we spoke about the men's divisions first, because if you want to see something that's really cut and dry, watch your bodybuilding classic physique and then men's physique. But that's like a prerequisite before you start looking at bikini judging. And I know some people will disagree, but you really need to see that cut and dryness to understand the subjectivity of the other division that's literally multiple heights in one class, no weight cap or anything like that. I think bikini and wellness tend to be the hardest to judge based on that.
Well, the couple thoughts that I have are Laura Lee, which may just be a unicorn, may be an anomaly because sometimes somebody's got the overall look that just dominates the judge's attention. But if they are setting a trend or trying to hold tight to some division criteria, the statement they make with her is to have the literal tie back to the whole reason the division was created, bikini, to be more accessible to more women, to not be overly muscular. And she really has an ectomorphic type frame, very little pectoralis musculature, where some of the women are almost a little bit bodybuilder-ish there. Um, some of the other competitors had really, really, really big delts that flowed into pretty large bicep tricep tie-ins. And Laura Lee just, looks very slim, even in her abdominal wall, which is primarily genetic. Instead of the big block abs that we kind of talked about with the second place winner in men's physique, she has really thin rectus abdominis, almost a wispy small waist. So she definitely gives the appearance of being less muscular, just enough shoulders on a wide, shoulder girdle. You look at the length of her clavicles and so forth, but the arms aren't overly muscular because she's kind of ectomorphic, that the tricep tendons are a little higher, which limits the amount of muscle she can have there. But then you're right, those glutes, you get to some pretty undersized legs compared to some of the other competitors. And then the glutes are the feature of the division that everybody goes for. And, genetics plus her work, her ability to, be intelligent in the gym, she just had that look. And I've seen this in similar divisions in similar eras where that person who comes in to the division that everybody wants to be less dominant from a muscle culture perspective. And when they really nail that, they stay under that line, they're rewarded. And I hope that doesn't sound like I'm criticizing her. I mean, she really nailed the division criteria. And, it's even impressive when you see her in real life, just running around with yoga pants on and a sweatshirt or something. It really does show a good ambassadorship for the sport, I believe.
Absolutely. She did the photo shoot over here at our house afterwards. And, just seeing her in normal clothes, you're right. It's, she is, it doesn't look as enhanced as when you're on stage. A lot of this comes down to posing. I know that she brought her glutes down from previous years to become more symmetrical too. And you're definitely right. One thing too about a few of the girls that were in the top five, some of them don't have breast augmentation. And I think that allows them to keep their shoulders downsized a little bit. And that's actually what I think an interesting twist was this year that I don't think many people are talking about. But, some of these girls don't have that big of shoulders, but they look decently big on them because, when you put a smaller shoulder up against 350 cubic units of silicone, it definitely is going to make the shoulder look different. And this could be a new trend where some of that stuff might be going out just a little bit in the sport.
Yeah, very interesting. I'm I guess I did not look that closely, but I would agree in culture in general. And just as coaches, we see that same thing as, the shape of the body, including whether you have augmentation or not. It will definitely change symmetry and the look of your physique in almost every pose. If you don't mind, let's bounce down to wellness because, it's kind of an adjunct after bikini came around. And this to me was wild. I mean, this is talk about I think finally hitting where they wanted to go with this division. I feel like this lineup was really, really strong in the differentiation between bikini, figure, and wellness. But how do you see it having played out?
This was a really tough one for me because um, the top 10 alone could have been switched up, I think, a lot of different ways. I mean, you had some champions in there who were just really hard to miss, really brought it. And even, to see the champion dethroned, I was wrong about that. Um, Arguably, you could say in a division that's a little unbalanced, that Isabel was a little more balanced than Francielle. And, that's just that line of how far is too far. I also think there were some differences in the front pose that really separated them too. So posing definitely, I think, became one of the prime differences between the two. Now, I could be completely wrong on that. I've not gotten to talk to any of the judges or like really see any great podcast on wellness or anything like that. But when you've got people like Cassandra Gillis in eighth, who typically wins or top twos every show that she's in, that just shows you what a strong lineup this was. Giselle ended up getting her qualification pretty early and kind of refined into this show and got fifth, but she's another really strong competitor. She was actually my athlete's booth mate at the meet and greet of the Olympians, and just seeing her in her jumpsuit, the Olympian jumpsuit, I thought she was gonna place better just based on, and even seeing her in prejudging, I think arguably she could have moved up. That was probably one of the toughest divisions to judge in the whole show this year.
Well, the reason I said what I did about the division really coming into its own here and defining itself with criteria, it's difficult to build glutes at this size, and that was kind of the defining feature when they brought this division forward, without building also your hamstrings and quads. I mean, if you have the legs to build that kind of muscle. So it reminds me when Ronnie Coleman began his reign as Mr. Olympia. One of the things that was just dominant with him were his glutes, because you looked at his glutes from origin to insertion, and it took up half of his femur. Most of the time as the glutes tie into the greater trochanters around, on the side of the femurs, there's the glutes are there, and then all of a sudden 2/3 of your leg, maybe 3/4 of your leg is hamstring, your upper leg. These women, I mean, they have those same genetic markers. I mean, their glutes can become that wide and that dense because of their genetic length. And then you're probably getting into an upper to lower body to torso ratio that favors lower body dominance. Some bodybuilders like Tom Platz, even myself, have that kind of physical structure where you look and say, geez, how did you get your legs so big? Well, thanks, mom and dad, for those genetics. But then you also, I don't think you can, I mean, I guess you could, but you're probably, if you have those genetics as more of a mesomorph, you're also going to tend to have a little bit more upper body size. And so compared to bikini, these women have more of a figure type upper body, a little more musculature all the way around, a little more muscle in the delts in the back and so forth. But I was impressed because instead of just the division being more about glutes and perhaps a difference in conditioning, it really is just an interesting look, which is still a little odd to me. Like why define a division like this? Is there one where it's just, and maybe men's physique is like this, where it's more your abs, your delts, your chest, etc., since we're covering the legs. But to really select for just a couple body parts was odd to me in the beginning, but this year it seemed to kind of work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
All right, so how about figure? What did you see there?
So figure was the one that I missed
Okay.
because my athlete missed her makeup appointment. So I was trying to make sure we had a foolproof plan on getting transportation to the venue immediately. So I'll let you take over figure.
Well, Sydney Gillen, if I'm saying that correctly, Jessica Reyes Padilla, Lola Montez, Natalie Soltera, Rhea Gale. Um, this was one of the divisions I kind of grew up watching once it bifurcated from bodybuilding, women's bodybuilding. And so this was always the first place to really show some femininity and to get away from just, mass and muscularity. And of course, then women just started coming in a little bigger, a little tighter, and it became just almost a pseudo bodybuilding. But when you look at the overall shape here of the women, I don't think there's really anything that I could say differently in terms of trends. One of the big things I wanted to use this podcast for was to say how is it evolving? How are all the divisions evolving with different judging standards? And every year the criteria of one kind of adjust the criteria of another. So there's just a natural progression. But I think you see, condition. I don't think you could argue it's any leaner or less lean than bikini, but you have all of the shape and the width in the back and the lats. Uh, the glute dominance is obviously not what it is in wellness, but it's almost like men's physique at this point where there's just a lot of balance. You're not trying to come in, probably as tight as you can. You want to balance that with more fullness. But yeah, this is one I just didn't necessarily see any movement in the judging. Any thoughts as you just kind of glance through anything that you missed from not seeing it on stage live?
The biggest thing that's so impressive about the figure is just how great these women's quad insertions are. You know, I it's actually interesting because it seems like they can find, 5 to 10 women that have prettier quad insertions than our open men's bodybuilders, and I don't know why, but that is always what has been so impressive about figure to me is you can literally see the separation of every single quad, the vastus lateralis, and I'm really a big figure fan. I hated to miss it, but definitely had some other things going on. But there's also that divide of the size component. I think figures a little bit easier for me to judge because I have a world champion in the IFBB figure masters competitor, and I really always like that. We cap it on not being too hard, but at this level, they are pretty hard, but it just really kind of comes down to that shape and that balance that just, sells the division so well. And I think they've done a really good job at progressing it without letting it get too far. I feel like figure has been really well protected with that over the past few years, which is, why Sid keeps winning over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's definitely in the shadows of bikini now. But you look at the division and you look at the women on stage and you think, is this more bikini-like or more bodybuilding-like? And to me, it is truly almost a perfect blend. These women that you mentioned the quads, I look at their backs and A, I'm jealous. But B, it's like, wow, like the amount of size that they maintain, and then they're trying to hit the division criteria on conditioning to match and not take it too far. But then there is, an elegance perspective to it. The posing obviously is more bikini-like than it is bodybuilding. And it's a tough class to make all of that work together. And yet when you see it, you know it. Like, wow, that's exactly why she won. Um, and then, going over to the open bodybuilding for Miss Olympia, Andrea Shaw, Angelo Yao, Ashley Lynette Jones, is it Haley Trevino, uh, Nadia Capastasto. Uh, it's intriguing. I mean, I'm a bodybuilder. I grew up even just before I competed as a pro, watching men and women all the way from Corey Everson on forward and seeing how women have taken it to the extreme. If that's your jam and that's what you want, these women keep bringing it year after year and under threat of there just not being any interest. But I think it's still just uh, dramatic, and they deserve just as much, accolades as the men. How did you think overall the women looked this year?
It was definitely a huge battle because you had Andrea who lost at the Rising Phoenix, which, I don't even think Andrea has been beat in the past few years. Angela Yeo was actually the person who beat her and got second. It's tough because I think Angela does have a little bit better separation in her quads, and Andrea's just a little on the top heavy side, you could argue. I think it'd be really helpful for her to secure more Olympias by, bringing up her legs just a tad, is just with Angela being on her toes. But, Andrea has such a better upper body than Angela was. And that's what was kind of interesting is you can point out the flaws here because I think it's like a less popular division, right? So until you have a lot of females that are kind of willing to, take the risk to do this, we're going to see that it could have gone either way with both. It really could have. I can see why Angela won the Rising Phoenix. But one thing I've always liked about Andrea, and this will be probably something it's personal preference, but Andrea always seems so feminine to me, and that really sells it for me. And that will Andrea is someone who should be doing women's bodybuilding for sure. It doesn't seem like we're risking a lot of the things that, 10 years down the road, I don't think she's going to really have many regrets. And, I kind of hate saying that because it is my personal opinion, and everyone does have their, their own personal preferences, but and everyone has the right to do what they want to do to their body. But I do think that when you start going down the line into this, you're really risking a lot of things with female bodybuilding in general.
Yeah, I like your comment about even making sure you have the femininity in this division and how that was an attractive point to you. I thought this was very similar to the men's physique call in having those two dramatically different physiques, but yet they were both amazing. Anybody could justify, flipping those two calls from first to second in both divisions. But I completely agree with what you're saying. The whole class was great, and they clearly made the call they did for that overall, upper body size and symmetry and so forth. But very, very tough call there. Let's see. We have fitness left. Did you get to watch that while you were there?
So I did miss fitness, and I literally caught the last. I caught the final grouping of women's physique. That
I was
was
gonna
that
say
was
we
it.
have women's physique as well. Maybe we should start there before we finish with fitness. Yeah, tell me your thoughts on this one.
That one was so hard with the top two. I'm such a Natalia fan. I'm not sure that I can, even say without just, she's just such a cool person. And I just have always loved her physique from the first Olympia I saw her at. That one's tough because I do think Sarah, arguably has some bigger quads. And, at what point do you say, that's bodybuilding? But then, the upper body's not quite in the bodybuilding category. Um, I, if I were a judge, I mean, if I can not like Natalia as much as I do, and I
Mm.
really try to do that in my head. I probably would have went with Natalia still. I really, there's just the it factor to her physique for me a little bit more than Sarah.
Mhm. Well, and outside of Natalia, there certainly is more muscle even in third, fourth, and fifth place. I mean, you do see that she was kind of the outlier in that regard. So I totally see what you mean, and it does depend. If you are still within the subjective constraints of the division, um, I could see where you would definitely want to go with her just on that overall look. But yeah, just again, really good lineup, and obviously they all deserved to be right up there in that first call out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, fitness. I'm sorry, yeah, fitness. Last one there. What were your thoughts on this?
Well, pulling up the list, it looks like Missy won, who's a tried and true champion. She's always been amazing. I am not as familiar with some of the other names here, so I could definitely see where Missy would take this pretty easily. It looks like a lot of the bigger names were out too, that we've typically seen over the years.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what a remarkable look. I'm watching a routine right here. Um, how do you consider the physique appearance between this and uh, bikini figure wellness, et cetera? I mean, the posing presentation aside, what are you looking for in a physique to make this one work?
That's probably where, Missy could refine a little bit more. She's always been a little bit smaller in the lower body. But the routine is so much more important than the actual physique round in this. So, it's probably not going to score many more points because she's one already probably winning the routine round anyhow. And then second, it's hard to push her physique in this division. Now, I think you'd really see her flaws if you put her up against a figure or even a physique, just due to balance issues on the top level. But if you can do the tricks and stuff, why not stay in this division? So, but you would see, even though this is a really amazing physique, you would definitely see some flaws if you put her in figure physique or anything like that, just due to balance.
Yeah, form and function, and that's the rarity, the outlier in this entire event, the Olympia. But yeah, the athleticism. I mean, wow. I mean, you just have to give it, to them to bring that to this division. But all right, we have kept everybody long enough here. We've almost doubled our normal time here for a feature, but really, really interesting to go through. Like I said, it was just kind of a pivotal, year for me in terms of what we're seeing, a changing of the guard in a few different ways. So appreciate you, and I'm sure you had fun. I should have come out there to join you. Busy fall of travel here for me, but we'll definitely have to do that next year.
Yeah, sounds great. We'd love to have you.
All right, guys. Well, thanks again for watching Contest Prep University. We will see you next time.